Hey, it's Ken Gagnon with the YouTube channel Gamebits with this week's IndieSider, where I play indie games and then interview the developer. This week I'm playing Induction, the first indie game from Bryan Gale, released on Steam, itch.io, and Humble on February 7th. I'm playing here on my Mac. It's a puzzle game. You play as this little square, easy. It's an isometric view, so when I push down, I'm actually going down to the left, up is up to the right. And you just have to get the square onto the little white square. That's easy. That was the first level, though. It gets more difficult, and you start to see some of the mechanics involved in this game. You haven't even scratched the surface yet. So push that over there, and the bridge appears. Great, that's kind of like a switch. It makes things happen. Still pretty easy. You're not seeing the gimmick of this game quite yet. That comes very shortly. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the movie Terminator. What could that be? Okay, nothing happening here, but let's see, maybe if I step on this. Aha! Easy. This is the very first game that is developed solely by Mr. Bryan Gale. This is his first indie title. He has worked at such studios as Electronic Arts previously. And this, I think, is where it gets tricky. Now, if I stay in the square, the bridge is there, but if I move, it disappears. And the game is telling me to push space. Well, I'm stuck here now. So why don't I hit space and see what happens. Oh, it creates a time echo. That is me from a few minutes ago doing exactly what I just did. So I move into like a parallel timeline where I've already done the things that I have done or am going to do. So let's move up to the next level here. It's going to get more complicated. So this is me. Gotta push that there. Oh, but then one bridge appears and the other disappears. So let's get in position, push spacebar, and start that time loop. I can move across this bridge while it still exists, and past me is going to make this bridge appear. Phew! Now what happens if I stick around? Okay, eventually he disappears. Boo. Alright, and I notice some other keys being listed here. Z, X, Q, R. What do those do? Okay, so Z is undo, basically, sends me back a move or two. Okay, that's easy. What about X? X seems to speed things up, so if I'm watching my time echo do something, I can make it go quickly. I can also rewind all the way back to the beginning. Q and R. Q brings me back to the menu if I hold it down, and R completely resets the level. That's what I wish I had known a minute ago. Haha! So let me show you a few more levels, and then we'll speak with Mr. Gale about his work with Induction and what prepared him for this indie adventure. Okay, so that creates that bridge, which I need to push something across. So let's make a time loop there and make sure the bridge stays in place long enough for me to get over there and get what I need. Hurry up, little guy. Hurry up. Okay, now let's see if I left the bridge up long enough to get this across. Phew, made it. And even after my time echo is gone and finished, that switch still stays in place. Great. Okay, so these are the main mechanics of the game. It is all about time loops, parallel timelines, and breaking your mind, kind of like the movie Primer, if you've seen that. So let's talk with Mr. Bryan Gale about his game, which you can find at inductiongame.com. I'll be asking him about mathematics, physics, and temporal mechanics, which are all super exciting. If you want to listen to just the audio without the video of the gameplay, you can find the audio podcast at IndieSider.net, where you can also leave a comment or a voicemail, or tweet at me at Gamebits for recommendations of other games that you would like to see featured on this podcast. Thanks for watching. Today I'm chatting with Bryan Gale, the developer of Induction, released on February 7th on Steam for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Hello, Bryan.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm great, thanks.
So at the time of this recording, it's February 3rd. It's a few days before the release of Induction. You must be very busy coming down to the wire, getting the game ready for release.
I'm kind of in this weird limbo position right now. So the game went out to press a couple of weeks ago for reviews, and it was kind of done at this point. So on the one hand, it feels like very stressful and hectic. On the other hand, I don't actually have a great deal to do right now. It's just lots of kind of checking and double checking and tweeting, that kind of thing.
Is there a deadline by which you have to submit the very final version to Steam in case you find a last-minute bug?
I don't think there is. I think I can just like do it right up to a wire. But unless kind of I get like a crash appearing of the logs, there's not. Everything's kind of very stable right now, which I'm quite happy about.
I'm sure that's good for your peace of mind because you don't want to be working on this up until the 11th hour.
Yeah, I'd rather not.
Great, so I've been playing this game on and off for the last few weeks. As you said, it went out to the press. And I know you've been playing this game and working on it for much longer than that. I understand development began as long as 4 years ago in 2013.
Yeah, it's been about 3.5 years. So it was October 2013.
Wow, and what is it that takes 4 years to make an indie game? Is that the usual turnaround time?
I definitely didn't want it to take this long. In my head, it'd been like something like. I mean, this is my first project as an indie developer, and I kind of thought, like, for my first project, I want to get something out in like 6 months or so. And I'd kind of had in mind, hey, maybe I'll do a game about time travel, but then I tried very hard to avoid doing it as my first game because I could see it ballooning into this big thing that I didn't want. But then nothing else I tried doing before that kind of grabbed me quite as much. So I was like, okay, I will have to do my game about time travel first before I do anything else. And then here I am 3.5 years later.
What would you say was the part of the game that took up most of that time? Was it the level design? Was it the play testing? The soundtrack? What was it?
I think it took about a year or so to kind of really nail down the mechanics. That was a lot of trial and error. How the game is now, with each level you start off with a single jump through time, you press a button and you jump back to the start of the timeline. How it started off was you'd kind of be able to kind of rewind back and forth through time like a videotape, and you'd be able to kind of do it as many times as you liked. And there was this kind of, it took me a while to kind of get over this kind of mental hurdle of taking away the infinite time jumps, because I'd had in my head I wanted to be generous. I wanted to like give you infinite time jumps, but then when I took that away, it was like a revelatory moment of like, oh, this is the game now. This is the bit that's interesting. The interesting bit here is what can you actually do with a single time jump. So kind of iterating it down and refining it and simplifying, that took a while. There was another design detour I went down where you'd press a button and instead of jumping back in time, you'd actually reverse the flow of time. So you'd be going forward and then like everything else would be rewinding around you, and you could kind of do that as many times as you wanted. So you could kind of keep flipping flow of time back and forth. So kind of experimenting with that kind of thing, like infinite time jumps, kind of rewinding, fast forwarding, kind of time flipping, getting those kind of bad ideas out of the way kind of took a long time.
Do you consider those bad ideas or just ideas that weren't a good fit for this game?
Maybe like bad ideas that weren't a good fit for this game, or at least ideas that were hard to build a game's worth of puzzles around. Like the time flipping idea, I really liked that, and I think maybe it's something I'll come back to at some point. It's just it didn't feel like there was enough there for a whole game.
When you say it's hard to build a whole game of puzzles around, how long does it take to design a single puzzle? Because you have to be thinking in 4 dimensions before you even start plotting out the level. It must be quite the brain freeze.
It is. It's really hard to kind of put a time frame on how long it takes to build an individual puzzle, because it's not like I will sit down and think like, I'm going to build a puzzle today. It's kind of, I'll do a few puzzles, I'd play test them, I'd see what came out of that, and then I'd refine them from there. Like a lot of the time what happened, I'd make a first pass at a puzzle and then I'd play test it a bit, and I'd like watching someone playing, I would see first of all, okay, I'd realize that okay, maybe there's more than one problem inside this puzzle and this could perhaps be split out into 2 puzzles. Or I would see a player they'd try a solution that didn't work, but then I'd think maybe I can build a puzzle where that is the solution. So it's kind of this very kind of gradual process of refinement rather than like sitting down saying like, this is a puzzle I'm going to build now.
Interesting. It sounds like over the 3.5 years you were working on this game, development really hit its stride when you were accepted into Stugan, is that correct?
Where I say it really hit its stride was being accepted into the left field collection at EGX in 2014. That was the first time I'd really put the game in front of a big audience, and that was kind of just gave me this moment of like, oh, maybe this is a game, something I should take seriously. And I kind of think if it hadn't been for the left field collection, Induction would still kind of be like my side project between freelance work.
And for those of us on the other side of the pond, what is left field?
Okay, so there's a big games event in London called EGX, And as part of it, I have kind of a curated indie section where we give some free space to kind of up-and-coming game developers, and I was lucky enough to get accepted to that.
Excellent. So that was back in 2014, and then a year later in 2015, you were part of an accelerator program?
Yes, so Stugan. So Stugan was, it was I guess the best way to sum it up is it's a summer camp for game developers. So it's something that's kind of been put together by these very successful people in the Swedish games industry, where take a dozen or so developers and put them out in these cabins in the beautiful Swedish countryside, and there was like a lake we could swim in, there was a sauna, the countryside was absolutely beautiful, they provided food and everything for us, and it was this absolutely fantastic environment to work in, because it kind of turns out like once you take away like the normal stresses of everyday life, if you're not thinking about bills, if you're not thinking about paying a rent, if you're not thinking about, oh, I have to go to the supermarket and buy food, and you can just kind of like focus all your energy on your game, and you've not got a lot of clutter inside your head. Once all that clutter's cleared, then you can kind of like go deeper on your design.
That sounds wonderful. There are so many side projects I would love to have a week to focus on, and if I could do that in a space designed for that kind of focus, I imagine I would get a lot more done, and I'd be a lot happier about it too.
Yeah, and it was also great being surrounded by other games developers, because they're always kind of such an inspiration, kind of like having other talented people around you.
Yeah, that's one of the important things that I think indie developers need to be aware of, is that even though you're operating as an indie, not necessarily in collaboration with other people, it's still helpful to be in a community of indie developers.
Oh yes, absolutely, yeah.
I read on your website that this game was inspired by you being asked the question of whether or not the original Terminator movie made sense. And that's one of my favorite movies, and that's a good question, and I'm wondering, how did that inspiration work, and what is your answer to that question?
Well, I'd kind of had in mind that I wanted to make this game about time travel, but I wasn't for a long time I wasn't exactly sure how to make a game about time travel or what particular focus I wanted it to have. Like, for example, one idea I played with was it would be a stealth game. I would make a stealth time travel game. So, because you kind of get this nice trade-off of this. Like, on the one hand, you'd have your time travel powers. On the other hand, if you're jumping back in time, there's lots of you to hide. So I was kind of like trying to find a way of like narrowing down my focus. So I wasn't just trying to do time travel. I was trying to do like a particular element of time travel. And then watching the Terminator, there's this plot point in the Terminator where, and hopefully I'm not spoiling it too much because the film's like 30 years old. So a guy gets sent back in time who then becomes the father of the guy who sent him back in time. So you kind of have this cause and effect loop. And I was kind of like discussing with my friend, like, is this okay? If you have time travel, does the laws of physics allow those kind of loops to happen? And that kind of gave me my focus of the game, because I kind of want this game to then be about like building those sorts of time loops and to kind of make it so that those kind of time loops are kind of at least halfway intuitive. Like a line I'm using a lot is that I want this game to rewire how you think about cause and effect, and that kind of sums it up really well, I think. I want kind of these weird scenarios to then become intuitive.
Yeah, the movie that this game most made me think of was Primer, which is a very difficult movie to get your head around because there are so many different timelines.
Yeah, you put that in your email. I was like so happy when I saw it. I was like, yes, that's kind of what I wanted.
You want people's heads to hurt?
A bit, yeah. I mean, one of the things that's been really interesting showing us at events is watching people get very, very frustrated with a game but still refusing to walk away. And that's been interesting because like, oh hey, there's other stuff you could go and play, but you're sticking up my game, which looks like it's making you a bit angry, but you're still sticking with it, and that's interesting. And I feel like it makes me feel like I've got my hooks into you somehow.
So there are a lot of movies that deal with time travel, such as The Terminator, Predestination, tons of Star Trek, but there are also a lot of video games that deal with it, like Blink's The Time Sweeper or Sega's Time Traveler Hologram. I've never played a game quite like Induction, though. What would you say are some of your comparables or some of your contemporaries in the time travel puzzler genre?
So there's an unreleased game, but it's coming out sometime this year called Still Time by a developer called Alan Zacconi. So he's another London-based indie developer, and I've only played his game very briefly, but his game was actually kind of had quite a large influence on mine because it kind of pushed me to go in a different direction. Originally, my game was very, very similar to his game. I mean, like seeing his game and playing it a bit, that kind of prompted me to kind of push my design further to kind of try and get away from what he was doing. So kind of just having that was kind of, as I said, kind of like massively kind of shaped the game that I've made.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to playing that game. Do you consider that a competitor to Induction?
I wouldn't quite say competitor. So they're very different games. This game is launching. Still Time is launching on PS4 and PS Vita first, I believe. So I wouldn't so much see us as competitors. We've like joked that at some point maybe we'll do a time travel bundle.
Oh, that'd be fun. I would definitely buy that.
Yeah. And another game I really want to mention is Thomas Was Alone.
Really? Because I have played that one. That doesn't strike me as a time travel game.
It's not so much like it's a time travel game. It's that I mean, it's not a time travel game. It's what was inspirational about Thomas Was Alone was just I saw Thomas Was Alone as kind of permission to make a game like the one I'm making. In fact, Thomas Was Alone, it was one developer. It didn't have an artist on board. It had like this very simple art style. And I worked with Mike before, Thomas Was Alone's developer, back at Bossa Studios, and kind of seeing him make for his game, it was kind of made it okay. I kind of hadn't twigged that you can just kind of go it alone and just kind of make your own thing, and put it out there as something that people might buy. So Thomas Was Alone was kind of really inspirational in that way.
One of the similarities I've seen between your game and Thomas Was Alone was the geometric protagonist, as opposed to a more identifiably human one like in Monument Valley. Why did you choose to go with a square instead of a person?
It's kind of just working within my skills. So my background is as a programmer, and so I kind of wanted to keep my game kind of something that I could plausibly make myself. So I kind of wanted to keep the art style simple. So all I'm thinking about is kind of shapes and colors rather than having to kind of figure out a walk, cycle, or draw a face.
And what about the name Induction? I looked it up online, and there is a mathematical induction that I'm not familiar with since that's not my background, but is that what inspired the name of this game?
Yeah, it is very much. So induction is a mathematical technique for working with infinities. So if you have a statement and you kind of if you have like a mathematical statement and you want to prove infinite variations of that statement, induction is kind of a way of setting up mathematical dominoes. So you push your first domino, and then the rest of the dominoes fall over, and you've kind of proven this infinite number of statements. And that ties into my game because I see it as each time you jump through time, you're actually creating infinite timelines. So you jump back in time, and that creates you're suddenly in a new timeline. But then there's a version of you in that timeline that then jumps back in time, and that's creating another timeline, and so on and so forth. So there's these infinite timelines, and that's sort of how it relates to induction, but in a mathematical sense.
And how did you become acquainted with that concept? Are you a mathematician?
So I studied mathematics at university, and I do feel like it's been a big influence on how I've approached making this game. Like designing the puzzles has felt very much kind of stimulating in the same way that doing kind of degree level mathematics is stimulating. And I feel like it's kind of influenced kind of how rigorous I've tried to be with physics of this game. I've tried to kind of not compromise on kind of how my model of time travel works. There would have been kind of ways I could have done it that would have made things easier on me and easier on the player. But I've kind of wanted to keep to something kind of very, very kind of strict.
Would you say that for budding developers, whether or not they want to work in time travel, that mathematics is something that they need to be comfortable with in order to be a programmer?
I wouldn't say it's something you need. I feel like it's been an inspiration for me making my particular game, but I don't think it's something you strictly need. It's definitely useful. It's definitely useful, and when I've worked with other people who've also had a background in mathematics, I think there is a definite style of program that people who have studied mathematics kind of then adopt, and it's a style kind of obviously I quite like. I wouldn't say it's 100% essential, but it's definitely kind of an influence.
I suppose it depends to a degree on the engines you're going to be using, because if there is a complicated physics engine that you need to use in a game, math might be more relevant there than it might in, say, Bejeweled.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're doing kind of like low-level graphics programming or kind of like low-level, if you're writing a physics engine, then it's probably kind of quite essential, yes. Yeah, but for game development in general, just like go out and make a game. I like a lot of the time you can just kind of get something off a shelf that's doing like the hard mathsy stuff for you.
Going back on where you got the name Induction from, and mathematical induction, all the infinite timelines, we could trade sci-fi tales back and forth all day, but one I want to mention is the book The Man Who Folded Himself by David Gerrold. Do you know that one?
I can't say I've heard of it.
Oh, it came out in 1973. It's written by the same gentleman who wrote the script for the Tribble episode of Star Trek back in the 60s.
Okay.
And in that book, this person becomes able to time travel, and he can obliterate his own history, his own existence, but he himself does not stop existing. He just moves into a timeline where he never existed. And so it sounds a little bit like Induction, where you can alter your own history without altering your present self.
How I'm viewing the physics of Induction is that you're trying to build a stable timeline, and as well as taking kind of this inspiration from mathematics, I'm also taking this inspiration from quantum physics. So when I say stable timeline, what I mean is one that's kind of triggers an infinite set of identical timelines, because I view it in the kind of a quantum mechanical way of at some point all these timelines kind of get smooshed together and averaged out. And if you're on kind of like the average timeline, then you're on the stable timeline and your solution will kind of survive at the end of the level. If you're on a unique timeline and then every other timeline is different, when the timelines get smooshed together, then whatever you've done will get lost. So that's kind of how I'm drawing on kind of quantum physics and the mechanics of induction.
So what you're saying is that your model of temporal mechanics is actually founded in science, not just some game developer's idea of how it should work.
A little bit. I've definitely taken inspirations there, and I've tried to kind of do something that to me feels honest. I mean, I don't want to overplay the kind of I don't want to overplay it kind of being physically plausible, but I've kind of tried to stick with something that to me feels kind of honest.
Fascinating. Wow. I want to talk a bit more about how the game got developed. For example, you have worked at some major studios, including Electronic Arts, and you've made browser games, mobile games, etc. How did that experience of working in AAA industry prepare you to be an indie developer?
I mean, first of all, I wasn't quite in AAA. When I was at EA, I was at an internal studio called Playfish, who were one of the first Facebook game developers. So it wasn't quite AAA. It was more kind of AAA, seeing Facebook as this hot new thing that was going to make a lot of money for them. And as it turned out, I think EA turned out to not to have done so well on Facebook, I don't think. But how I think it prepared me, I think it gave me like good preparation for kind of working on a long kind of multi-year project. I think it's prepared me well in terms of knowing that stuff can go wrong last minute. So I feel like I've approached this in a very conservative way in terms of what my internal deadline was before launch, kind of like, and how much time I was leaving. I think if I didn't have that background, like launch would be a lot more rushed and a lot more hectic. And it was just like generally good practice as a programmer to kind of like be doing my programming, to be doing my first indie game after having kind of had 5 years experience kind of working on games like as part of the studio.
So it sounds like EA laid a great foundation, not only EA, but your other companies that you've worked for laid a good foundation for you to be an indie developer, but it's also a very different environment you're in now. You have a lot fewer resources, a much smaller budget. Other than those obvious things, though, that a big studio can provide that an indie may not be able to, what is something that you miss about working in that environment?
Something I missed when I first went in indie was having a routine or having a reason to stick to a routine. Like when I first started working my game, I was kind of working 7 days a week because I didn't have... weekends kind of weren't a thing that were externally given. They were something they weren't a thing I was externally given. I had to sort of realize for myself, I should probably start taking weekends and not be working on my game 7 days a week. So kind of giving myself, I had to realize that, this structure's been taken away. I need to give it to myself.
Yeah, that sort of structure is much easier to maintain when it's externally imposed.
Yeah, and you kind of don't it kind of took me a while to realize that was something that had been taken away, or at least I'd kind of walked away from.
And of course, one of the other big changes going from EA to being an indie developer is not necessarily working with a team anymore, but you didn't work entirely alone on Induction. You had the fantastic soundtrack of Tim Scheel for Induction, is that correct?
It's been really great working with Tim. So I'd kind of been a bit at a loss, kind of like who I wanted to get to compose the soundtrack for my game, and then when I was showing it as part of the Indie Mega Booth at PAX in Boston, Tim came up to me and was like, "Hey, I'd like to do music for your game." And I was like, "Yes." So I vaguely knew of him from his work on Duet, but I hadn't really considered him as someone to approach. I kind of thought, I don't know, I just hadn't kind of quite clicked for me. But when he came and spoke to me, I was like, "Oh my god, you are the right person to make the soundtrack for your game." And I was just really, really excited to have him on board.
That's great. I was wondering how the two of you met, because you're in London, he is, I believe, in Melbourne, Australia, so that's half a world apart, and here you are collaborating on a game because you met right in my own hometown of Boston.
Yeah, but time zones have been tricky, but it's just about worked.
I can imagine there aren't many times when you're replying to each other immediately.
Not many. No. We kind of managed things with like Skype calls and with email, and we kind of managed to like get into like a good regular structure of kind of back and forth, and that's been very helpful.
Excellent. So at some of your previous studios, you worked on such games as Tiny Games and Sesame Street Tiny Games, Pepper Panic Saga, which at some point were also released for mobile, in addition to being browser games. But Induction, by contrast, is releasing on Steam. Why did you choose that platform instead of mobile?
It seemed very much like the easiest first platform to do. I've got like no particular loyalty to any particular platform, and once it's out on PC, then I'll be looking into what's next, whether it's console or mobile or whatever. So getting on Steam was just kind of like the easiest thing to do, and getting on once you've kind of gone through the greenlight process, and there's no real barriers to updating. It seems like a good first platform to do because you can update it when you want. You can like build up a community, and then from there it kind of makes sense to kind of take that as a launchpad to kind of other platforms.
So you will be taking Induction to other platforms?
I'd like to. I kind of don't want to commit to anything right now. It's something I'm going to look more into once launch is out of the way. Well,
I would like to see that, because this is a game, if you can figure out the controls right, I would love to see myself playing on my iPad mini when I'm sitting on the subway.
I mean, the very earliest versions of the game, they were on PS Vita up until I think it was up until 2015. It was very easy to get Unity games up and running on Vita, so I'd kind of have my PC build, and then when I was going to events, I'd kind of like take my Vita version as well, and that was kind of really great to just hand to people, and they would say be like, "Hey, play my game now."
And what happened to the Vita version?
At some point, Sony discontinued Unity support for Vita, so that kind of put that on hold for a bit. So, I mean, if the Vita's still alive, maybe I'll come back and do a Vita version, but I feel like that ship has sailed now.
It seems like your resources could be better spent elsewhere.
Possibly, yes.
Excellent. Well, like I said, this is February 3rd we're recording. It's airing on February 8th, the day after your game came out. I'm hoping that you're keeping your head on your shoulders and that the reception is good. It sounds like some of the pre-release media that you've been getting is positive. Are you happy with the feedback you're hearing right now?
I am, yeah. It's making me very hopeful for how the launch is going to go.
Excellent. So remind our viewers where they can find your game and yourself online.
So Induction will be on Steam, Humble, and itch.io from February 7th. And you can also go to www.inductiongame.com.
And if they want to follow yourself on Twitter?
So I am Bryan Gale on Twitter, and that's Bryan with a Y.
Excellent. Bryan Gale, developer of Induction. Thank you so much for your time.